So once the Pilgrims get to the New World, once the Pilgrims are in the New World, they run into all kinds of obstacles. First of all, it's really late fall, and they're there at the beginning of winter. That's not going to be a fun time. And in Massachusetts, winters are cold. So things are really tough to begin with. They obviously can't plant. They can't have a harvest even if they could. So they have to live off of whatever they can trap or hunt. And they have hard times with that.
Can I say something right quick?
Yes.
So on the Mayflower Compact, I didn't know this until we were going over, till I was like studying this a little bit. They signed that on November 11th, which is the same day as Veterans Day.
That's
I
interesting.
just found that interesting.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, they happen upon one day while they're eating some of a meager meal. They've been able to catch a few rabbits or whatever, and a couple of Indians show up. Immediately, the men are afraid. They reach for their guns because they don't know if these Indians are hostile or not. They've already probably had some experiences by now. And one of them begins speaking perfect English to them. Says, "Look, we are friends. We're here in peace. My name is Squanto." And we'll talk a little bit more about Squanto here in a few minutes. We'll go ahead and stick to the story of the Pilgrims first of all. But Squanto joined and came along with them and helped them through that first winter. He taught them how to skin beaver, how to cook certain things. Going into the next year, when it was time to plant, he taught them certain things that the Indians did around there, like catching fish and putting fish down in the ground whenever you plant, because that fish, as it rots, it will act as fertilizer. So Squanto and his friend, starts with an M, Mesosota. Well, Squanto and another friend of his, they were very helpful to the Pilgrims and helped them make it. So that first winter had been very, very difficult. Half of them had died, including William Bradford's wife, who he had married before they left Holland. So at the end of that first winter, you've only got about 20 of the original separatists who were there. And tough times. They finally, though, they had the Lord bless them plentiful that year in 1621. They had a great feast. Some of the local Indians came. They enjoyed venison and, we believe, turkey. We don't know yet whether or not turkey being there and being a part of the meal is a myth or not yet. I tend to hope that there was turkey there. And I believe there was.
So there were, so the Somerset was the one that was with Squanto, and then those two came together with the Pilgrims, and they connected them with the chief Massasoit of that tribe, of a tribe there, so that they made a union. So they came together and had that big feast together.
Right, and when things really began to look up for them was at one point when they decided to ditch this company store. I told you we would get back to this, but as the Pilgrims first got there during that hard time, they acted in a way that was, they called it a company store, but anything that was produced went to one overall store. Things were given out. It was basically an early form of communism, an early form of socialism, way before Karl Marx ever wrote about it. But it didn't work. And it didn't work because William Bradford, he wrote in his journals and wrote that it caused so much disharmony because no one was satisfied with anyone else. There were people that weren't doing their job and expecting everyone else to take care of them. There were people that mad that they were having to do all the work. William Bradford finally just decided we will never pay off our financier this way. And we're going to have to ditch the company store. And he took the land that they had, they divided up into plots between all of the families, and they began to work the plot, and they moved to a barter system. And then all of a sudden, blessings come pouring down. Their little economy explodes. Everyone's doing great. Everyone is happy because people could be as resourceful as they wanted to be. They could be industrious as they wanted to be. And William Bradford comments that he has never seen any people working so hard and enjoying their work so much.
Right. It's because they owned property.
Mm-hmm.
They had ownership of the property, and they took responsibility, personal responsibility for their own, because it was their own. Where it's communism, there's no way to excel or to get better or any of that stuff. You're just kind of dependent upon everybody else, and if nobody else is wanting to work, then why should you work? I mean, that communal type of way was just, it's just not a good setup. It's just not. And this financier had given, a set out rule. This is it was called bylaws. They were supposed to follow these bylaws, and they tried, but it just didn't work out.
Right. Right. So 1621, you've got this as partial reason of the blessing. When it comes to their harvest that they had this year, God truly worked out a miracle. I'm going to read to you. This is from William Bradford and from his journal. He is writing about, and first let me premise this so that this is not confusing. A lot of people back in that day, even writing in their journals, they would write in third person. Even if they were involved in the incidents they're writing about, they would write in third person. So when I read this to you, and it sounds like William Bradford's writing about another people that he's not a part of, he was part of them. It's just a way that they wrote during that century. All right. This is from his journal. I may here not omit how, notwithstanding all their great pains and industry, and ye great hopes of large crop, the Lord seemed to take away the same, and to threaten further and more some famine unto them by a great drought, which continued from ye 3 weeks in May, till about ye middle of July, without any rain, and with great heat, for ye most part, insomuch as ye corn began to wither away, though it was set with fish, the moisture whereof had helped, yet at length it began to languish sore. Upon which they set apart a solemn day of humiliation to seek ye Lord by humble and fervent prayer in this great distress. And he was pleased to give them a gracious and speedy answer, both to their own and the Indians' admiration that lived amongst them. For all ye morning and greatest part of the day it was clear weather and very hot, and not a cloud or any sign of rain to be seen, yet toward evening it began to overcast, and shortly after to rain, with such sweet and gentle showers as gave them cause of rejoicing and blessing God. It came without either wind or thunder or any violence, and by degrees in abundance, that ye earth was thoroughly wet and soaked therewith, which did so apparently revive and quicken ye decayed corn and other fruits, as wonderful to see, and made ye Indians astonished to behold. And afterwards the Lord sent them such seasonable showers with interchange of fair warm weather, as though through his blessing caused a fruitful and liberal harvest, to their no small comfort and rejoicing. For with mercy and in time convenient they set apart a day of thanksgiving. Now, that day of Thanksgiving is the one that we talked about, where they invited the local Indians to come and join in with them. Now, Jamie, before I read about Squanto, do you have anything that you want to say about these things?
No, you're fine.
All right. So as to not leave anyone hanging on Squanto, I said this man just walks up to the Pilgrims and is speaking perfect English, and he just comes out of nowhere as this Indian who speaks perfect English. I can't leave that story unturned. So this is from a historian who was named as Richard Johnson. This is from the Weirton Times. But it's an abridged story of Squanto. Extremely interesting story. Squanto was a Native American who learned the English language while working as a guide. Now, remember that it was in 1605 that the Jamestown colony came about. So 15 years before the Pilgrims even got here, the Jamestown colony was there. So it's very likely that during that time, it was some of the explorers that Squanto was introduced to English and probably served as a guide to some English-speaking people, probably from Virginia. He was later captured by Spanish slavers. He was freed by some monks who bought him out of slavery and said to him, "Estás libre," you are free. Squanto looked clear into the eyes of the men of God. Though he knew no Spanish, he understood. Over the next few weeks, he pieced it all together. It was their love for this person, Jesus, that had prompted these Christian brothers to buy Indian slaves and to teach them the Christian faith before turning them loose. As the monks nursed him back to health, Squanto also began to trust in this Jesus. Yet he longed for home. The Indian used his command of English to find a fishing boat headed for London, where he rejoined his explorer friends. Again, Squanto became a guide for explorations of the New World. Years passed, and the day finally came when he saw the familiar coastlands of home. Once more, he was granted permission to go ashore. No one greeted Squanto at the beach. He ran to his village. The bark-covered round houses were empty. Not even a dog barked. Graves outside the village told the story. Samoset, his friend from a neighboring tribe, could bring little comfort. A white man's sickness has struck your people. 1 week, all dead. Many villages lie silent like Pawtucket. Squanto's emptiness overwhelmed him. Parents, brothers, sisters, friends, gone forever. He wandered the forest for weeks in grief. Finally, he went to live with his friend Samoset. One cold December morning, 6 months after he returned, Squanto watched the white sails of a ship grow on the stormy horizon. This time he hid as the men came ashore. Their clothes looked different from those worn by sailors and the fancy English officers that he had seen on other ships. Broad hats and great black capes shielded them from the biting wind. He could glimpse white caps and long dresses of women aboard the ship anchored in the bay. Often he saw children playing on the deck. As green leaves came to clothe barren trees, the settlers began to build houses on the very place where his village had stood. Day after day, Squanto watched intently, never seen. Samoset urged him to meet these settlers. A cry went up as the Indians strode into the settlement. Men grabbed their muskets. The Native Americans lifted their hands in greeting. "My name is Squanto. This is Samoset. We come in peace." The settlers were astounded. An Indian who spoke clear English? The Pilgrims lowered their muskets and invited the Indians to share their meager meal. The sun had set by the time Samoset got up to leave, but Squanto hesitated. Many of the settlers had already died from disease and winter's bitter cold. There was little food, yet they weren't giving up. He thought of his old village's battle with death. "You go," Squanto told his friend in their Indian tongue. "I'm staying. This is my home and my village. These will be my new people. Squanto turned to the leaders. May I stay with you? I can help you. I know where you can find food in the forest. The white men studied the Indian carefully. Could he be trusted? Still, the struggling colony was in no position to refuse help. Yes, please stay. That spring and summer, Squanto proved his worth many times over. He led them to brooks alive with herring, beginning their spring migration upstream. He showed the settlers how to fish with traps. He taught them where to stalk game in the forest. The children learned what berries they could pick for their families. 20 acres of corn grew tall after Squanto showed the pilgrims how to plant fish with the native corn seeds from a local tribe. Once a hostile tribe captured Squanto. If he is killed, shouted their chief, the English have lost their tongue. A small pilgrim force arrived just in time, firing their muskets in the air. The terrified chief released his captive and fled. Squanto repaid the pilgrims' favor. His bargaining skills kept neighboring tribes from attacking the small Plymouth colony. In the fall, the pilgrims planned a feast to celebrate God's merciful help. Squanto was sent to invite friendly Chief Massasoit and his braves. They gathered around tables spread with venison, roast duck, goose, turkeys, shellfish, bread, vegetables, and woodland fruits and berries for dessert. Before they ate, the pilgrim men removed their wine-brimmed hats, and the Indians stood reverently as the governor led them in a solemn prayer. Thank you, great God, for the bounty that you have supplied us. Thank you for protecting us in hardship and meeting all our needs. Toward the end of a long prayer, Squanto was startled to hear his own name. And thank you for bringing to us the Indian Squanto, your own special instrument to save us from hunger and to help us establish a colony in this new land. Squanto stood. It was a day to remember. 2 years passed, and Squanto lay mortally ill, struck by a raging fever while scouting the east of the Plymouth. He turned over in his mind the events of his strange life. It almost seemed that a plan had been leading him all the time. For the first time he was captured, he learned English. The second time, he was freed by gentle Christians who taught him to trust in Jesus. And though his own people had died of sickness, God gave him a new people, and he helped them build their colony where his old village had once stood. The pilgrim leader, William Bradford, knelt at his bedside. Pray for me, Governor, the Indian whispered, that I may go to God in heaven. Squanto breathed his last, November 1622, gone from the New World, but entering a heavenly one. So is that not a great story?
Amen.
I just think that it's funny how these people that have been involved in history, that have done things like this, were just thrown into these situations. And God provided them a moral compass to follow. They had no idea that they were doing things like fulfilling prophecy, or that they were helping to establish what would become the most successful nation on earth.
And this is a reminder of a little bit, of the book in Genesis, where Joseph is thrown in jail, and thrown into slavery and then thrown in jail, and all the while, all these years go by, and God's preparing him, to be the savior of the world, basically.
Right.
Well, the same thing happened with Squanto. He was
Yeah.
thrown into slavery, taken
Right.
across to England, brought back, and God used him to save the new world, to
Yes.
save to save his people.
Yeah.
And if not for Squanto, those pilgrims probably would not have survived. God I mean, he knew English and everything.
Yeah.
He knew English and everything. I mean, without him, they probably would not have made it.
Yeah.
And how many people have, know that story,
I know.
I mean, that is just an amazing, and monks set him free, and then he makes it back over. I mean, he lost everything. He lost his whole family.
Yeah.
He was probably so excited to be back home just to find out they were all gone. That would have just been awful. And then all of a sudden it's also a reminder of what happens in the Bible, where a lot of times God just destroys a whole tribe, and then people show up and there's all this stuff, and they didn't have to do anything. It's just there. There are stories like that.
But it's also in Squanto's case, if he had not left with English before he was captured by Spanish, if he had not been with them, he would have died too.
Yes.
His whole
Yes.
tribe died. He would have died.
Yes.
God, for one thing, removed him from that situation to preserve his life, because God had plans for this man.
Yes.
Brought him back home, set up the situation to where Squanto would adopt the Pilgrims as his people and help take care of them. An instrument of God, and the Pilgrims recognize this. So, all right, well, that's all I have to say about that. Janie, anything closing?
Yeah, well, all I wanted to bring up was that throughout the rest of American history, as far as like Thanksgiving goes, there were proclamations of Thanksgiving. Initially, it was a state thing. By states and per colonies, they would do this. It was stated that after, what was that battle I told you? Battle of Saratoga? Is that a thing?
Yes.
Okay. That's probably wrong though. Don't take my word on this. But anyway, there was George Washington proclaimed a day of Thanksgiving after the battle, I believe, of Saratoga. I'm probably wrong on that. But throughout history, there were proclamations of people wanting, like the leaders wanting everyone to bow in humility and fasting. And then when God would come and abundantly bless and answer those prayers, they would make a proclamation of thanksgiving. And that happened a few times, throughout history of America. But what I found was a little letter. I'm not even sure. This was on the National Archives. So it says, "This is the proclamation which set the precedent for America's National Day of Thanksgiving. During his administration, President Lincoln issued many orders similar to this. For example, on November 28, 1861, he ordered government departments closed for a local day of Thanksgiving. Sarah Josepha Hale, a 74-year-old magazine editor, wrote a letter to Lincoln on September 28, 1863, urging him to have the day of our annual Thanksgiving made a national and fixed Union festival. She explained, "You may have observed that for some years past there has been an increasing interest felt in our land to have the Thanksgiving Day held on the same day in all states. It now needs national recognition and authoritative fixation, only to become permanently an American custom and institution. Prior to this, each state scheduled its own Thanksgiving holiday at different times. Mainly in New England and other northern states, President Lincoln responded to Miss Hale's request immediately, unlike several of his predecessors who ignored her petitions altogether. In her letter to Lincoln, she mentioned that she had been advocating a national Thanksgiving date for 15 years. As the editor of Godey's Lady's book, George Washington was the first president to proclaim a day of Thanksgiving, issuing his request on October 3rd, 1789, exactly 74 years before Lincoln's. The document below sets apart the last Thursday of November as the day of thanksgiving and praise. So I'm not going to read all that, but I just wanted to say that that was the official federal proclamation of Thanksgiving. And there's a whole proclamation that I'm not going to read, but that was when it was. But there were many proclamations. It's just that was the actual federal, all the states together having this. And it actually, if you read the whole proclamation, it happened in the middle of the Civil War. So Abraham Lincoln was really, really wanting to proclaim Thanksgiving in the middle of this mess that was going on. So, yeah.
Anything else? May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Happy Thanksgiving to each and every one of you. And we're thankful for you.
Amen. Very.